Welcome to the Rational Egoist. I'm your host, Michael Liebowitz. With us today is a YouTuber who I came across on Twitter, and I was told that I absolutely had to debate this guy on anarcho-capitalism. He goes by the name of Liquid Zulu, and he identifies as an objectivist ANCAP. Liquid Zulu, welcome.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Okay, so what do you mean by objectivist ANCAP? What is that exactly?
So basically, I think that objectivism, properly interpreted, um, it implies the anarcho-capitalist legal theory. I have my previous proofs of the non-aggression principle have been um, they haven't really been properly rooted in good philosophy, which is what I've done. Basically, oh, sorry, got an alarm going off. Basically the we can go into it in detail at some point. But the basic idea is that anything other than the non-aggression principle when it comes to law, that reduces into the primacy of consciousness, which is falsified on objectivist grounds. And I think that the way Rand went wrong was that she was answering the incorrect question when it came up to her politics. She wasn't applying what I call is law, which I consider a subset of ethics. So I don't consider it like some extra separate branch, which is answering a completely different question. It's okay, well, we're talking about how should humans be acting, what should they be doing, um, in this certain subset, which is, well, we've got scarcity, therefore we can have conflicts. How should we deal with conflicts?
Okay, so I happen to agree with you if I'm hearing you right about the libertarian non-aggression principle. Some even call it a non-aggression axiom because it's far from axiomatic. It needs to be proven. It can't just be postulated, which seems to be what a lot of libertarians do. They don't derive it from a broader theory of ethics. And I think that Ayn Rand, while she didn't call it the non-aggression principle, she talked about the immorality of initiating force against others. But it's the basic same principles that you shouldn't initiate physical force against another human being, but you do have the right to self-defense. So how do you think that she went wrong in her application?
So basically, well, one way to put it is I was reading Opar the other week, and like in the section on politics, when Peikoff gets to like the government, he's talking about like, okay, well, how should society be structured, and what are the proper functionings of government? And I see a few problems in there. First, it like already assumes that you're going to have this thing called the state, and it's going to be a monopoly and everything, and we're just deciding how it's going to be run. And also, it's taking a sort of primacy of society here, within politics at least. It's like, okay, well, we've got this big society, we've got this collective, and how should this thing operate? It's like, well, hold on, that's the wrong question. The question is, how should the individuals who are part of this group, how should they be acting, right?
Okay, so there's two interrelated questions here as far as from how I see it. One has to do with the ethics of how an individual should act. What I mean by that is if I'm gauging and assessing by a rational standard how I should conduct myself, and I assume you accept Rand's standard of value of moral value as life is the standard of moral value. And I think it's clear that I ought not to initiate force against others. But that doesn't tell us how to function in a group if somebody else decides to initiate force. So I think that the fundamental question when it comes to how society should be organized or how individuals should interact is what is the best method of defending and protecting the individual rights of the various people that are engaging in the community. Would you take issue with that formulation?
Um, so I would disagree that we are. Sorry, I forgot the first part of that. I wasn't writing it down quick enough. But I think there are, as far as I see it, two layers to the to Rand's argument here. It's first the government. We need government because we need someone to define the laws and say what the laws are, and then we also need a monopoly to enforce those laws. Um, I I don't think either of those are required. I don't think you need a monopoly to define or create the laws because I don't think the laws are defined or created by like an individual or anything. I think they
Mhm.
are already a thing, just as it is in aesthetics, right? You don't need some board of artists and they say, okay, right, here are the correct aesthetic principles. It's already inherent in philosophy. You just have to go out there and discover it. And then on the enforcement of laws, I also don't agree that a monopoly is going to be the best way to enforce those laws. I also don't think that excluding other people in, from defending rights is a good thing. I think that's
No,
criminal.
no,
So it's
but I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to clarify my question. My question is the thing that needs to be answered, the question that needs to be answered first in what you're saying is not what type of government best protects rights. It's what is the best method or what is the best arrangement to protect rights. But you agree that individual rights need to be protected, correct? That's important for individuals. Do you agree individuals have rights?
yeah, I think it's important to defend the rights,
Okay, so
but I don't
then,
think it is. To be clear, I don't think it is the job of philosophy to be saying what the correct method for um, sort of defending rights is. I think that's the realm of like maybe economics or something, or uh, police police studies or whatever it would be called.
well, see, that seems like a contradiction to me. And I'll let you tell me if I'm wrong, but you did say that laws, politics is a part of ethics, didn't you?
Yeah.
And ethics is clearly a part of philosophy.
Yeah, but I'm saying that all law does is tell you, okay, this is a justifiable action, this is not justified, this is criminal, this is innocent, all that stuff, sort of stuff. It doesn't say, okay, this is criminal, and the correct way you should go about defending that crime is you have three handguns, and then you get your buddies together. Like that is outside the realm of philosophy. You certainly apply philosophy to that, but it's not the realm of philosophy as such to say this is the correct way to go about defending people's rights.
But the question over whether there should be an anarcho-capitalist society with competing agencies or an anarcho-capitalist society with covenant communities or a minarchist government of some sort, those are the proper scope of philosophy. I mean, it maybe not as when you get down to the well, everything is philosophy in life. It's the application. I mean, you get that to particulars, but broad parameters are philosophical questions. So whether we should have a government at all, no government, or what, those are philosophical questions that need to be answered.
Well, it would be certainly an application of philosophy, but it's in the same way that, okay, well, should my restaurant be serving steak or chicken on this day? That would you'd certainly apply philosophy to that question, and you'd apply economics to it and all sorts of stuff. But that doesn't mean that this is some question within philosophy. If you're having like a history of philosophy course, you wouldn't have like, okay, well, what did Aristotle think about what my restaurant should serve on Wednesdays? Like, it's not part of like philosophy. Philosophy is like really broad stuff. It's the broadest abstraction you can possibly make. So you're not going to have particular stuff which is stuff like, okay, well, what sort of structure, bureaucratic structure should this society have? Now you could certainly apply philosophy if I think that philosophy already has it. That on the philosophy grounds that we have the non-aggression principle, and the non-aggression principle implies that you don't have a right to stop other people from defending their property. So you can't have a monopolistic defense of property on those grounds. But that's still an application, right?
Okay, so I mean, even going back to the pre-Socratic philosophers, they discussed law and in government. I mean, Plato has an entire work called The Republic, and Aristotle has the Politics. So, I mean, philosophers, if you were to take a history of philosophy class, you definitely would be coming across political philosophy. I mean, I don't want to get too much bogged down into this particular question because I don't think it really addresses the crux of the debate about anarchism versus minarchism. But
Sure.
it is important, though, I think, that broadly speaking, politics is a function of philosophy. I mean, is a proper subject of philosophy.
Well, I would say
And
like
historically, it has been.
if we're going back to like ancient Greece, they considered everything to be philosophy because philosophy was just the love of wisdom. So physics is philosophy on that ground, biology. But I agree that it's not really important how we're classifying this is
Okay.
philosophy, this isn't philosophy. So we can maybe move on to
Okay.
more like
So, but the question that we want to answer is, you and I would both agree that individual rights are important. And I'm guessing, I don't know because I haven't heard your particular argument for anarcho-capitalism, but I do know, enough about Roy Childs, Murray Rothbard, Lysander Spooner, et cetera, where the argument essentially is that there's no way to have a state that doesn't violate rights. That unless every single member of the body politic consented to the government, then it's not a legitimate government. Is that an accurate portrayal of your view, or do you need to clarify?
I don't think it's about even necessarily everyone agreeing, because for any enforcement of rights, definitely the guy who's wanting to violate the rights doesn't agree. It's more to do with, okay, well, could you have any sort of a justifiable claim to having monopoly on, let's say, just rights enforcement, or anything? Could I have a monopoly on restaurant, and I'm the only guy who's able to produce food, right? I think no, because the only way to coherently understand what a monopoly means is you're preventing competition. You're keeping competition out, because it's not just, I'm the only guy who's able to sell Liquid Zulu's hair, right? I could shave it off and sell it, right? That doesn't mean that I have a monopoly, right? Because I'm not holding out competition. Um, it is, and if you're holding out competition, if you're preventing people from, in this case, um, self-defense, from setting up competing firms for defending rights, um, then you are essentially operating on the premise that they don't have property rights. So the easy case for this is self-defense. If there's a true monopoly on the use of retaliatory force, then I'm not allowed to use retaliatory force in Randian terms, right? So I'm not allowed to defend my property. So that means that I am not allowed to exclude people from my property. But all a property right means is I have the right to exclude people. So these two ideas are incompatible.
Okay. So what you just said about, if you don't have a right to retaliatory force, you don't have the right to exclude people from your property. That's just that's inaccurate, and I'll tell you why. Because in Randian philosophy, direct self-defense is perfectly allowable. So if somebody forces their way onto your property, you certainly are within your rights to physically remove them from your property. That wouldn't be retaliatory force. That would be direct self-defense.
It is in retaliation to the force. So it's just retaliatory as meaning not initiatory.
Yeah, no, but that's not, that's the thing is, in objectivism, in Rand's political theory, there's two separate things. That there's self-defense, direct self-defense, as if you hit me and I hit you right back. She would call that, I'm defending myself from further aggression by you. Whereas retaliatory would be, is if you attack me and then you run up the street and then I chase you down and beat you up or whatever, that would be the retaliatory force. I still have the right to self-defense when it's necessary to protect my well-being or the well-being of others. It's the retaliatory force that she says we have to basically uh, I don't know what the right word is. I'm losing it here, but assign to a government or a state is however you want to put it. Delegate is the word, that we delegate our right to retaliatory force to an organization that would have a monopoly over a particular geographical area. But self-defense would still be perfectly appropriate.
Okay, so retaliatory force, that would be something like punishment as against. So
Sure,
to be clear, it would be if somebody like took my TV and they were running in the street and then I chased after them, I'd still be able to take my TV back, right?
sure. I, I,
Okay.
I mean, there's obviously, I think there would be, there's always sort of on a continuum. Well, how far do you get to chase the guy? How long after he takes your TV? Those things would be very, that's up for debate. But the basic principle, if a guy takes your TV and runs away, I think you're allowed to tackle him and get your TV back. Yeah. I don't think that would violate the delegation of rights to retaliatory force.
Okay, so I think this still is incompatible with property rights,
Okay. No,
in a very
okay. No,
and in a very specific way.
Okay.
Because I agree with Kinsella on his theory of estoppel, and I maybe somewhat idiosyncratic, not exactly agreeing with him on the specifics, because I think you actually own the right to retribution. If somebody, let's just take punching. Somebody punches me in the face.
Yeah.
Um, I therefore own the right to retribute against them, which is punching them back.
Hmm.
So I could do that at any point in the future. I own that right now. Um, the problem with then saying, "Oh no, the government, they are the only ones who are allowed to retaliate," then I no longer have that right. So it's still incompatible with the non-aggression principle,
Okay.
which I establish on objectivist grounds.
Okay. So I disagree, but we'll get to that. I just wanted to make sure that we knew exactly what it is that about which we're disagreeing. So would you agree with me that if a given action rises to such a risk that even if it doesn't necessarily violate the rights of somebody, the risk of it doing so would warrant its preclusion from society or from human arrangements. What I mean is like this. I can fire a gun out my window right now. It might not hit anybody. It might not hit anybody's property, but there is such a risk that it will hit somebody. I think it's warranted to ban such conduct. Similarly with drunk driving, I think if somebody is absolutely plastered driving down the street, they may not hit anybody, but there's such a risk that they will, that it warrants prohibiting it. Would you disagree with that or agree with it?
Um, I would disagree with the principle, but not necessarily the example. So, um, I think I don't think there are any exceptions to the non-aggression principle. I don't think there's anything which is innocent and you're still allowed to prohibit it. I think the prohibition, the prevention through like aggressive means
Mhm.
of anything innocent is itself a crime. It's because I count all aggression as a crime. But I think that if you're firing a gun randomly and you just so happen to be missing the person across the street, you're still aggressing against them. Uh, in my view, you're still initiating a conflict over the use of their property. So, yes, if you're putting someone at risk, it's not that. Well, it's just so risky that we've got to prohibit it anyway. It's no, it is this amount of riskiness, however you want to quantify that, and it's also an aggression. So that's why you're allowed to prohibit it, not because it's really risky.
See, my defense of minarchism would be this, and it's based on the basic idea that we just talked about, that assuming you have a government that all it does is protect rights, right? It doesn't tax, it doesn't do any of those things. It just protects rights. I understand that no government like this has ever existed. But I also understand that in order for such a government to exist, the bulk of the population would have to accept the idea. But that's true of any liberty-based philosophy needs that. Whether it's going to be anarcho-capitalism, minarchism, whatever, we're going to have to convince people to accept it.
Yeah, it's almost
So,
parallels.
right. So if we've got an organization already that is protecting rights, and that doesn't necessarily preclude all other organizations that protect rights, because you might have a situation where you have bodyguards, self-defense agencies, security guards, whatever, that do the same thing, but they don't compete with the main organization. Is that if you've already got rights protected and then you have an organization that wants to rise up, the risk of that organization in turn leading to rights violations is so high that I would say it's justified in excluding it from developing. And
Well, I
and
think
as we go, I'll show why. But go ahead and you can respond.
Yeah, I think it's just prima facie kind of absurd to think, okay, well, either we have a bunch of little term. To be clear, I don't think anarcho-capitalism describes some specific bureaucratic structure. I think it describes it's a theory of what the
Mm-hmm.
law is. Um, but let's just say two possible scenarios. We've got a world of 10,000 Liechtensteins, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just tiny little things, and you can vote with your feet. You can go all over the place. Maybe we even have like an Iceland, medieval Iceland type situation where they don't even have a certain territory. And they're just kind of like firms that you can buy into, and they're kind of geographically situated based on like where their headquarters is and whatnot. That world versus a world where one guy gets to decide what the law is, and he's Superman, so he can just enforce whatever laws he wants, right? Which one do we think is more likely to uh, result in rights violations? And I would say it's clearly when you've only got one agency up at the top, and all you got to do is convince this agency that rights are no longer a good thing, and boom, you're done, right? You can't just go to a different guy.
Okay. Well, first, I postulated an organization that was protecting rights. But here's my question: are you for Hoppian covenant communities or Rothbardian competing defense agencies where you would have multiple agencies within a given geographic region?
Well, I don't think it's a choice. I don't think there's an alternative there. You can have both, right? It's like
Okay.
I'm not for restaurants as against grocery stores. I'm
Okay.
just have both of them, and then let it be up to the market. And if people want grocery stores, they can go start grocery stores and patronize grocery stores, right?
Okay. So with covenant communities, there's a strong argument that that these are just governments because you have a given geographical area. And what I mean by that is there's continuity from house to house, restaurant to restaurant. They're governed by the same rules, the same laws in a given area. That to me is basically indistinguishable from government. It's just of a smaller area. You have a government in this small area. But when it comes to competing defense agencies in the same geographical area, and what I mean by that is it's not continuous. So you have, six houses, in a row, and each has a different defense agency, or one defense agency, has a house here, then a house over here. And here's a couple problems with that, right? Suppose, for instance, you've got an 18-year-old guy and he's dating a 17-year-old girl. The 18-year-old guy's defense agency says that this relationship is perfectly lawful. The 17-year-old girl's agency says no, it's not. The two have sex. The girl's parents report this to their defense agency. They want the kid prosecuted. How do you resolve it?
Well, I don't think that these agencies are able to make the law. Um, this is why I'm very clear. Maybe I haven't been clear enough here, or maybe I say this elsewhere at least.
Mhm.
Um, that I'm very particular with the way I describe anarcho-capitalism. I don't describe it as this is a specific bureaucratic structure. We're going to have these defense agencies, and they're going to be like this and that and other things. Like people like to play like dress up in their minds about what the society will look like. That's fine,
Okay.
whatever. Um, but I don't think they are making the law. I don't think you can have like this is why I don't like David Friedman very much on this topic. I think he's poison. Um, where it's like, oh well, we're going to decide that 17 is the age of consent, and we're going to decide that 18 is the age of consent, and then we're just going to have to go to arbitration about it or whatever. I think there is an objective answer to any given legal dispute. One of them is correct, one of them is incorrect, one of them is aggressor, one of them is innocent. If so long as you're cutting up what you're describing as the disputes sufficiently. Right, so you're not bundling together. There are people like did a bunch of disputes against each other, and
Mhm.
they're both aggressive and different ones. So uh, the way you would resolve that, if we're actually in a situation where we've got some sort of conflict, the way you resolve that is if you're a peaceful person, you go to arbitration and you try and sort out an arbitration. Hopefully, you'll have agreed upon rules for what's okay within your community or whatever. If you don't, all legal theory gives us is sort of a boundary, an outer boundary of what is permissible. And that boundary is the non aggression principle. Anything within that, you can have all sorts of crazy systems of rules built up within there. That's fine, so long as everybody agrees to it. And there are specific ways that you have to be able to agree to things. But yeah, that is the answer there. You go to arbitration, and then they might still disagree with the arbitration, and you can keep going up, and there is no final arbiter. Like, yeah, I agree, there's no final arbiter, and then they're left with fighting, right? That's the final stage. They're left with fighting, but the truth is, they're always left with fighting, right? Having a final arbiter doesn't negate that they're left with fighting if they just can't agree. It's just now that there's also going to be a third party in here fighting, right? But you're still having fighting there.
Well, this is where Rothbard loses me because Rothbard makes a similar argument. He says you're going to have a body of libertarian law that's going to govern, and then you have to have a final arbiter. But if you have a final arbiter, it seems to me, unless that final arbiter has the power to enforce its rulings, like I went to prison for 25 years, right? If I went to court and it was between me and the plaintiff bringing the charges, and even if I agreed to the arbitration, if that arbiter didn't have the power to lock me up, I'm not going to jail. It's that simple. I don't give a damn what I've agreed to, especially then. I was 21 years old and out of my mind. If you don't have an organization that's powerful enough to put me in prison, I'm not going. And I don't know how you get that if you've got all these different competing defense agencies. First of all, I don't know who is enacting the larger body of law and who's going to be the arbiters or the Supreme Court or whatever you want to call it. But if you have them and they have no power, what the hell do I care? And I'm just some 5'8", 175-pound dude. I mean, you have criminal organizations out there. And that would never listen. John Gotti certainly never goes to prison in that scenario.
Right. But like it's never going to be the case that the final arbiter is like some sort of a magician or whatever. He can just wave his magic wand and make sure that everybody obeys the NEP, right? There are no guarantees. Like the man-made is not immutable, right?
No.
There's always choices, and you can always escape jail or evade your capture or whatever it is, right? There are never going to be any guarantees, and very simply, that fact that there are no guarantees, that sometimes you're going to be left with fighting, that doesn't justify the state. And also,
Well,
well, if we're going to allow postulations that we've got this rational society where everybody is like everybody's walking around in their John Galt, right? If we're going to allow that for the minarchist case, why not allow it for the anarchist case? Why are we assuming
because I'm
suddenly that
not.
everybody's always going to be fighting?
Because
Right?
I never postulated that everybody would be rational. I postulated a state. What I'm saying is what I would argue for is a minarchist government that has a monopoly on retaliatory force over a given jurisdiction, that all it does is protect rights. Now, I agree that that's never taken place, but it has been somewhat approximated. Now, it's true as a historical fact that it's grown, in the case of the United States, way beyond anything that was ever intended. That doesn't mean that that's a necessary consequence of government, that there's nothing inherent in the concept that necessitates it growing. That's a function of the populace and what the populace will allow. But that's going to be the case in any political system, whatever it's going to be, how the majority of the population, or at least the majority of those with passion behind them. Because obviously, if you have 70% that are just completely apathetic and 30 people that are, into it, those 30 are going to hold sway. But unless you're able to convince people, you're never going to have anything. So you're never going to get your type of system. But that's why I'm arguing for the minarchist government that I am. But it's no more utopian than or unrealistic than an anarcho-capitalist society. And I'm not saying anarcho-capitalist is utopian, because I think it's the same thing. You have to, in order to try this, you've got to convince enough people to go for it.
Right. So I think even if you have a rational state,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure we would agree on this. If the broad population out there are all irrational, then it's not going to be able to enforce anything. It's weak, right? And the same is true for these security agencies within Ancapistan, whatever you might want to call it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, in both cases, if you have like a broad majority of people are all raving irrationalists, then you're going to have a lot of problems out of that. And if the broad society is highly rational, in either case, then you're not going to get that problem. You're not going to have these competing firms where they can't agree and they're going into constant wars and all that sort of stuff. If this guy is trying to evade capture and evade punishment for his crimes, then just go to your local like bounty hunter or whatever. Say, hey, I'll give you $500 if you can get that guy back and get me my stuff back. Or beforehand, if you're planning ahead, then you'd buy insurance for your property. You'd insure your property. Then the insurance firm's going to go after him with the goddamn hammer of Thor, and
Sure.
way more efficiently than a monopoly would,
Well,
because we don't have the economic calculation problem anymore.
if all I had to contend with were bounty hunters, I'm okay with that. Let's have it. But not now. I'm saying, but back then, the whole point was I knew once I was, because I made a choice to go to court. I was on my way to court, and I knew, okay, if I run, they're going to find me. There's no getting away from that. Not only that, but they've got officers in every county in every state that will hunt me down, and I have nothing. Even if I got all my friends together, we're not competing against them. But in the case of an anarcho-capitalist society, first of all, competition, like you said, is very efficient. But there's nothing in that situation to stop a defense agency from arising that protects criminals. I mean, that's exactly what the mafia is. So if you have the mafia, and the mafia is then competing just with defense agencies rather than with the United States government, you've got a serious problem on your hands. And I don't know how you solve that.
Well, you solve it again by having the correct philosophy in place. If you have the correct philosophy in place, then you're not going to get these criminal defense agencies popping up, which is the same for the state. It's the same always, right?
Well,
I think you're maybe underestimating just how powerful these free market firms could be. You're saying, well, if I just have to deal with bounty hunters, that's fine. I'll just evade them. What if these bounty hunters have like fucking space lasers that they can just instantly find where you are and boom, and you're dead, right? You're not going to be able to evade them
well,
if they're
yeah.
way more
Well,
efficient than
but
the
here's the
government.
thing: if they're that powerful, then what is the superiority of that over your powerful state?
Because they're
If
competing. They can allocate means efficiently, and they're not
so
using
that it's so
doing
then it's
criminal
not
things.
actually about protecting rights in that scenario. It's about allocating means efficiently. Because if they're that
Let's go.
powerful and you don't have
Let's
somebody to protect you that's more powerful, what's to stop them from violating your rights?
Well, they got that powerful by not being criminals, by not being savage brutes, right? That's how they got so powerful. John Gall. I won't spoil anything for people who haven't read the book. Um, but he was very definitely by the end way more powerful than the government, and he got that powerful by actually being a moral guy. That's how he was able to do all the things he did and invent the crazy stuff they did, right? And if you if you have an actual free market defense firm, they are going to be orders of magnitude. Like if we look at goddamn like desert savages are able to repel the most powerful military we've ever seen on planet Earth, right? And you know why that is? Because that most powerful military we've seen on planet Earth, they're spending trillions of dollars on stuff they don't need. Like, you'll see these demonstrations in like the U.S. like cabinet or whatever it's called, right? Where they'll hold up like a bag of nails. And it's like this bag of nails the U.S. military paid
Yeah, yeah.
100 grand for. It's
Yeah,
like
I don't disagree
they're
with
way
that,
inefficient.
but I do disagree that that's why they can't beat the desert gatherers. Because if they wanted to, they could. I mean, just as a matter of pure fact, if we wanted to take out the Taliban when we were fighting Afghanistan, we could have wiped out the whole country. The problem is there's moral considerations that stop them. At least considerations of the morality of the populace and the global population who wouldn't go for it. They certainly had the ability to wipe them out.
Well,
The Soviet
the
Union
global
certainly had the
population was
ability. The
the
global
global population was
population
way going for wiping out the Taliban.
Hold on. The global population would not have stood for us nuking Afghanistan. They wouldn't. That is just not true. They would not have gone for that. They hullabaloo every time civilians get killed. Now, if you were to just wipe out the country, they would have never went for that. But
Okay,
I
so,
want.
so
But
you're
what I'm kind of go ahead. I want to let you respond. I'm not going to
sure.
preclude
So I don't
responding.
think the correct idea of like really cutting edge military is, oh well, let's blow them all up. Screw it. I think that's a highly inefficient
Oh,
and
I do
B doesn't
too.
actually work, right? It's gonna create way more enemies than you actually need to be creating here. I'm saying that they can't actually go in and take out the enemy that needs to be taken out without creating 50 more enemies all around them.
Well, I don't disagree with that necessarily. I just disagree with the idea that the reason they don't beat the particular people they're fighting is because they're inefficient, because they could beat them.
Well, that's at least one reason, right? There might
Yeah.
be other reasons.
So, see, the thing that I'm having a problem with under this system is in the United States, you take it, we have a government, right? So the Congress passes laws. Let's say it's a law to raise revenue. This law initiates in the House, goes to the Senate, then it goes to the president. He signs it into law. Then the executive branch of the government is responsible for enforcing that law. In the case of the anarcho-capitalist society, what organization is responsible for enacting and promulgating the laws that you're talking about that are going to govern all the agencies?
Well, it's a lot like asking, well, in a free market, who produced the bread? Like, this is an old joke. Like, two guys in a Soviet bread line, they've been waiting for hours. And it's like, oh my God, I can't believe we have to wait hours for stale bread. Other guy turns to him, it's like, you think this is bad? In capitalism, they don't even have bread lines, right? It's like, under anarcho-capitalism, what system would we have to produce food? System would we have to produce airplanes? It's the same question. What system would we have to produce rights enforcement? You just leave it up to the market. Let the market decide, right? And the market's going to find the most efficient way. If I could tell you right now, okay, here's the exact structure we're going to have, and we're going to have all these little doodads, then I would be omniscient. I would be able to be a central planner. And as we know, central planning isn't possible. And nobody, not even Ayn Rand, was able to centrally plan a government, her system. It still falls afoul of the economic calculation problem. She can't
Well,
tell you how much defense there should be for each individual. She can't. It's not possible.
no, but there's a difference between having general laws that are applicable to everybody in a geographic area in a loaf of bread that I can choose to go buy or not buy. There's a difference, and the bread maker is
Yeah, but the
also
laws
competing
aren't.
with other bread makers. But you're in this situation, if you're going to have, you're saying there shouldn't be a monopoly on force, but you are saying there's going to be a monopoly on lawmaking.
No, no, no.
Because if
There isn't going to be lawmaking because I
well,
don't
then
think men make
where's this
law.
law? What's the law that these
I,
organizations are obeying?
it's in the same way that there isn't ethics making. Like nobody's there saying, okay, these are what the proper principles of ethics are, and I'm producing these proper principles of ethics, right? It's just already those are the proper principles of ethics, and you have to go out in there and discover them, right? But you don't have to. Nobody's there producing them. It's the same thing with law. The proper principles of law are already there, and I've discovered them, and other people have discovered them, right? You just have to go out there and discover them, right?
Yeah, but
They're
there's so
already
much
there.
disagreement over it, and that's kind of the whole point.
Well, there's
Is
always
that
disagreement.
well,
Like
there
what?
is, but when there is, but when you have a monopoly on force, it doesn't matter. A monopoly on retaliatory force, it doesn't matter whether I disagree or not. I can disagree till I'm blue in the face. They've got the monopoly, but you're talking about competing defense agencies. And if these competing defense agencies disagree about what these laws are, then you've got the problem that I gave you with the 18-year-old and the 17-year-old. Or you're going to have it
Yeah,
in regard to what if
and,
one
and
agency
if
accepts IP, the other agency doesn't. One guy takes the IP from a
well,
guy and another, then what do you do? How do you resolve it?
we're moving away now from the
No, we're not.
postulation. Hold on, we're moving away now from the postulation that this was a society which generally accepted objectivism, right? Correct philosophy,
No,
right?
no, I didn't say
Because
that. I
well,
didn't
hold on,
postulate that, but I never
hold
postulated
then
that.
hold on. What if the government then disagrees over what is the correct way to do things? Then you have a civil war, right?
Well,
You can have that in both
you
systems.
definitely will. You definitely can. What I'm all I'm saying is if you have an agency strong enough that it has a monopoly over retaliatory force and that agency protects rights, it doesn't have to be acceptance necessarily that the majority accept objectivism. You could have people that that in the society that just accept the NAP. They might accept argumentation ethics. They might accept John Locke. They might accept the rights defense as a result of utilitarianism. But they agree that the function of government is to do this. That's what you would have to convince them of. Now you're talking about a situation where you're going to have multiple defense agencies. So even if you had, say, 2/3 of the population were objectivist, if you had another third that were socialist and they're allowed to start up their own defense agency and they radically differ as to the law, and you don't have any promulgated laws, you're going to end up with a serious problem, whether it be with IP, whether it be with the statutory rape or an abundance of other things, whether it could be fraud, it could be statute of limitations. There's in statute of limitations, by the way, that's not necessarily a rights violation thing. Or how you get due process. Do you have to have a lawyer? Does the state have to provide a lawyer for you? Can they take your property without your consent as in eminent domain? There's a whole abundance of laws that people need to know ahead of time in order to know how to act properly. And if you're just saying everybody has to discover them, well, that's just going to lead to chaos. That's why you
Hold
need a
on,
written
hold on.
constitution and a written criminal code
It
and a
won't
written
necessarily.
civil code too.
I
Huh?
don't see why on earth. I don't see why on earth that would necessarily lead to chaos at all. You're going to have chaos. Like I think Binswanger in one of the videos, I watched some lectures on politics a while back from the objectivists. Um, Binswanger says, well, when Ayn Rand witnessed this when she was in Crimea, right? It was one day the flag would go up, and it was the Red Army had it, and another day the other flag would go up, and you had to look at which flag was up, at which point to know which laws you're under, and that's why anarchy doesn't work, and that's why anarchy is chaos. No, that's because this was a horribly irrational society, right? If you have a broadly rational society, then you're not going to have these things. You're going to have rational people who understand already, right? Everybody already understands the basics of the NEP, and they evade it constantly, right? But it's already out there. They already understand this stuff. It's not rocket science. And if you have, you brought up the example, well, what if you have 25% socialists in your ANCAP stand, right? If you have 25% of your population is socialist anywhere, that's going to be a huge problem. That's a big problem. And this is why one reason why you should all move to New Hampshire. Go to New
Well,
Hampshire, concentrate in New Hampshire, and then you have you're defending against socialists because the socialists don't want to go there.
but it wouldn't be as big of a problem if you had an organization strong enough to stop them. If you had
Sure.
an organization
Pay
monopoly of
pay for
force.
insurance. So
Well,
put your money where my mouth is.
but
Pay
that's
for
the inherent
insurance,
problem. If
and then they
each
can bomb the socialists if need be.
but if each person, if there's all these competing agencies that none of them rises up to have that kind of power, then a 25% block is far more significant than if you have one central government that's doing that, that's protecting
That's
it.
not at all true.
Why isn't
Because
it?
no, 'cause it's a general rule of economics that competing firms will tend to be way more efficient than a monopoly, right? So if you have this 75% monopoly, that's going to be way less efficient than the 75% competing firms, and they can join up, they can coalesce together,
Well,
and then
Standard Oil
the
was very
strike teams can
efficient.
go off the socialists,
Standard Oil
right?
gained monopoly
Standard Oil wasn't a
status.
monopoly.
No,
Standard Oil was not a monopoly.
no, because there wasn't barriers to entry.
Okay, well,
I grant you that, but I'm saying but they were a very, very large. There weren't. What I mean is there weren't a lot of competing firms, right? They were a dominant firm. They had about 90% market share, and
and it
yet
went down. By the way, it went
it,
down to 60% by the time the antitrust laws came in, so
but
they were falling.
but they still had a very large portion. Even if it's 60, even if it was just 40, it's huge. But my point is they were efficient. And I'm
Mhm.
not talking about general efficiency here, where I'm talking about protection of rights and what is the best way to do it. Efficiency, you might be cheaper, might be streamlined, whatever. But if you have competition, then there's also going to be firms that'll rise up to protect bad guys because that's what competition produces. There's different services for different people. There's no reason that an organization wouldn't rise up that's powerful enough to protect bad guys, as in the case of the mafia, which arises even in our society. Even when there is a powerful government, they're just not powerful enough to compete with it.
Doesn't that like throw a little red flag up in your mind when you say like, oh yeah, even if we have this monopoly, then these bad guys can pop up and do their bad stuff? Like,
No,
yeah,
because they
bad guys
can't.
can
No,
always
no,
pop
it
up.
doesn't put a red flag, and I'll tell you why. Because first of all, the government that we have is far more inefficient than the government that I'm talking about because they try to do everything. Right. They're not just limited to protecting rights. They're trying to do everything. But secondly, the mafia doesn't actually compete with them. The mafia is limited in scope of what it can accomplish. It's still, you're never going to eliminate all crime under any system of government. I don't care what you do. It's a matter of the extent in how much they're allowed to compete or how much they're allowed to wreak havoc on society. And again, in the case of IP, people even that accept NAP, even that accept objectivism, disagree over intellectual property. Rational people can disagree, and that's a significant area of law. And if you don't have it published, and you've got one agency that protects it and another agency that doesn't, you're going to end up with significant clashes because
Yeah,
I'm going to demand that you protect my rights and get me my money because this guy violated my right to intellectual property. His agency is absolutely going to defend him. And then you
yeah.
end up with
Uh,
violence.
and those agencies that are defending intellectual property, they're the bad guys in that
Well,
situation, and
I get that
that's a
that's
bad
your
thing.
position, but my only point is that rational people can disagree. Rational people can draw different conclusions on specific areas like that. And if it's not published ahead of time, then people don't know how to behave. And that's what leads to violence, especially when each one has an agency that's protecting it,
So we
protecting
kind of
him or her.
we're kind of in this area of, okay, well, what is the best way to defend these rights? So
Yeah.
we can presume for now that we have already established some sort of objective legal theory, or you understand what the law is. What is the best way to enforce that? And it's like, I don't think that if you have a monopoly, then you face the economic calculation problem. So in your minarchist state, how much defense of rights are they providing to each individual? Is it like an armed guard on each street corner? Are they having tanks roving down the streets? Are they just giving everyone handguns? They can do it themselves. Like, how much rights protection should there be
Well,
produced?
when you say the economic calculation problem, I want to know specifically what you mean. I know, and it's no disrespect to you. I just don't know how well you understand it. You may understand it perfectly well. I just want to make sure that if we're gonna get into marginal utility and subjective valuations, that we're on the same page. So, when you are talking about that, the economic calculation problem, what exactly are you referencing?
Sure. So basically, the economic calculation problem says that, well, if you have a single will directing the factors of production, then you can't trade those factors. So you can't get factor prices, which means that you can't do any calculations of input costs versus output profits, right? You can't do that
Okay.
calculation. So then means are being
Okay.
misallocated.
Okay. You get it. I just wanted to make sure. Like I said, I don't mean any disrespect. I've just never discussed it with you, so I don't know. So I'm not even going to disagree that a minarchist government would face that problem. Kind of. It still would know prices of various materials to make, say, police cars. Like, you would still know the cost of automobiles, cost of tires, cost of guns, all that sort of thing. Now, how many police and all that? I'm not claiming there wouldn't be inefficiencies. What I'm claiming is that those inefficiencies wouldn't be as harmful to individual rights as would be, or to the overall chaos that would ensue as would result from anarcho-capitalism. And let me give you an example. So if we've got our different competing defense agencies, right? And you and I are walking down the street together, and we witness a crime occurring. A guy's beating up some guy, down the street. Who do we call? Do we call my defense agency? Do we call your defense agency? Do we call the property owner's defense agency, who we may not know, or the guy who's getting beat up, his defense agency? How do we know whom to call? Because my defense agency isn't likely to be paying to be coming to defend everybody else. They're there to defend me and the people that pay them, not the people that don't. So whom do we call in that situation, and how do we know?
Sure, this seems like a great opportunity for some entrepreneur to go, hey, Mr. Community over here, I'll set up a nice 911 line for you. And people just call 911, and that's real easy. And then they can get the relevant defense agency will be sorted out in the background, and they'll be sent in, and it'll all be sorted out. In the same way, you could do the same with pizza. Call
Well, who's going to
992,
pay for that
and
though?
you've got pizza.
Who's going to pay for that general defense that you're talking about? And if it's
Well, what?
provided generally, then why would I pay for it somewhere else? If I
Well,
know
so
that if I'm somewhere and I'm going to get attacked and I can just call this 911 number that you're talking about, then why in God's green earth would I hire a defense agency?
there have been many situations in the past where a bunch of businesses are set up somewhere, and they're like, you know what, we probably get more foot traffic if we had a road here. So what they do is they set up a company, and that company builds the road, and it runs the road and everything, and then you could do the same with 911 calls. This is the idea behind covenant communities, right? You can have some general idea of what's going on in this area. You know what the emergency number is in this. I mean, even right now, your phone automatically corrects the emergency services number to the correct emergency services number for the area you're in,
Right,
right?
but you're
And
assuming right there that that this is kind of my point, Zulu. Is that I don't know. Do you go by Liquid or Zulu? I don't even know, or just Liquid Zulu. I'm
Zulu's
not
fine.
really sure. Zulu. Okay. Is that if I know that in a given geographic area I can call 911, that, and I'm assuming this is going to be wherever I go, why would I hire my own personal defense if I can just call this number? Why am I going to
Because
pay twice? If I'm not paying for this general defense, in which case I just, you suffer the free rider problem, or I am paying for it, in which case why am I going to pay somebody else? And then you end up with, okay, well then you just have a police force that governs a given geographic area, and I don't know how that differs from government.
Sure. So if we have this sort of situation where you want to be like a free rider or whatever, and you call them up and you say, "Hey, this guy, some guy took my TV," and they might just go, "Yeah, our records show that you don't actually pay us any money, so pay us money, and then we'll go get him." Right? They can just refuse
Okay.
services to you.
Mm-hmm. But if I'm
It makes
paying
sense. It makes
them,
sense. It makes sense
no,
for them to
no,
show up at
sure.
least.
So, but if I'm paying them already, well, then why am I paying a separate defense agency? And if there's not a separate defense agency, how does that differ from government?
Well, if you have already got insurance on your property,
Mhm.
then yeah, just call up. If somebody's attacking you or whatever, call
No,
up
no,
your
no, no,
insurance.
no. Remember the example I gave? You and I are walking down the street and we notice in the distance that there's a crime being committed. Somebody's being attacked. And I asked you, how do we know what agency to call? And you responded by saying, well, there's going to be a general agency for that area. And what
There
I'm
could be.
saying, okay, but if there isn't, then we're back to square one. Who do we call? Whom do we call? And if there is, I don't know how that differs from government, because you then have one agency in a given area that's protecting everybody.
So
And
like
if there's
let's
multiple, by the way, let me just say, if there's multiple, then you're going to have the problem of redundancy, or even competing. If I call, you call, but then what if one of those guys calls his and he says he's being attacked, and then they all show up, and now you've got another problem on your hands.
let's say I'm wanting to advertise some security enforcement services to you, and I say, hey, whatever crime you see, call us up and we'll sort it, right? And then isn't that a great selling point?
No.
We'll just sort it for you, and you can just call us up, and we'll sort it all in the background. We'll sort out the
Yeah.
bureaucracy. We'll figure out who's supposed to go where.
Yeah, but
Is
why
that not
would no, but why would I want to
clearly
pay
you
for
want?
all that?
But
Why would I
clearly
pay
you
for all
want.
that?
Clearly, this is a service you want because you're so concerned about it, right? So
No,
clearly, you do want that service.
not necessarily enough to pay for it, especially because I know the chances of me witnessing a
What
crime
if the
like that are
service?
slim.
What if that type of service costs you 1 penny for every 100
Yeah.
years that you have access
Okay.
to it?
Then you have this issue. Okay. I call this agency that I have. Somebody else that witnesses the crime has the same service. They call their agency. Somebody else has their agency. And then let's say the attacker in that situation, he has his agency. So he sees the other agencies come. First of all, they don't know who's who because they're not all on the same team. And that guy calls his agency and says he's the one being attacked. Then what do you do? When you have
If
multiple agencies are going to show up. That's the first thing. None of them know whom the others are. And one of them there is there to protect the bad guy. When
yeah,
you have just one agency, you don't have this problem because they all wear a uniform, they show up, and anybody else that attempts to interfere gets in trouble.
yeah, so if you're civilized people, what you do there is you talk it out and you say, "Hey, I recorded on my phone. This guy was he's the attacker." And then they go, "Yeah, prima facie, you look like the attacker, bro. Let's take this
Mhm.
to court." You know, why would his agency want to go to war to protect this delinquent guy?
Maybe
Who
he
you
pays
know?
them a lot.
Okay,
There's no
then you
reason that there's a
hold on.
demand for that.
Hold on. Then you just have the situation of, well, what if a big mob of people, a big gang of people, show up and they're all evil? But then we're again moving away from the presumption this is a
No, but
generally
they're
rational society.
but those people aren't specifically being called to intervene. If a mob of
Yeah,
evil people shows up, you're talking about a scenario where it's a very realistic possibility that multiple people show up to stop this crime from occurring, and a possibility that one group shows up to protect the guy that's committing the crime. That's a very real possibility. There's nothing in this society you're talking about to exclude criminals from hiring a defense agency. Nothing.
there's hold on. There's nothing under your system to prevent just a big gang of criminals getting together and doing
Sure,
awful
there
things.
is. Yes, there is.
What is there?
There's a central authority that is there to stop that from
And
happening.
how does and okay, how does a having a central authority,
Yeah.
is this like a magic spell that they can
No,
cast and then suddenly nobody's able to form a big
no,
mob of
no,
criminals and
no.
hurt
But
people?
no. But when you have an organization, let's say the mafia, and they're committing crimes and they're growing, then a government can say, this is a rights violating organization. Let's break it up. Let's get in there. Let's stop it from happening.
Okay,
But
I
when
want to know
you,
what would prevent
sure.
all these other firms, and they're saying, "Hey, this is clearly a delinquent group of people. They're awful people. Let's go in there and let's sort them out. Let's stop them from doing their activities, their criminal activities."
Well,
What
they
prevents
could.
that?
Well, nothing would prevent it. But if you,
There you go.
no, I don't. Listen. If you have, so if that's what's going on, if you have a bunch of coordinate, this is what I don't get. If you've got a bunch of coordinating agencies all operating under one group of law, under one, constitution, let's say, right? I don't know how that differs from government, from the exact government I'm talking about. They're going to coordinate with one another to protect rights. They're operating under one set of rules. How is that not government?
Because there's competition. I mean, you might want to call it government. Some people use the word government to mean any sort of governance going on, whatever. Fine. But it's definitely not a state because it's not a monopoly, right? It's competing.
Okay, so you have these competing agencies. And then you have the possibility, of course, that one agency is better than the rest. And then that agency does what Robert Nozick says and becomes the big wig on the plant on the planet. That's not an argument against
So
anarcho-capitalism. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying, well, it kind of is. It's an argument against its practicality, but it's not an argument against its inefficiency. And it's
so let me
also, I
ask you this.
believe, what Geloso says too. I'm not positive because my memory's not serving me
Let me
wonderfully
ask you
right now.
this. If
Yeah, go ahead.
there is surely one best restaurant in the world. They have the best food, the best service,
Sure.
everything. Um, why is that restaurant not the only restaurant?
Because they don't have guns. That's why.
Why
You're
does
talking
guns change anything?
no, but we're talking specifically about agencies of defense, agencies that are armed, agencies that use
Yeah.
violence. You're
So
not talking about simply a restaurant. It's a different thing.
when I go to an agency to defend my rights, what I'm looking for is a service of defending my rights. When I go to a restaurant, I'm looking for the service of
Mhm.
getting nice food and all that stuff. What is the disanalogy here?
What is the disanalogy is that one group is using force and the other isn't. That's the
But why is
difference.
that just one person is cooking pork and the other is cooking vegetables?
Because force is different in kind than cooking vegetables. You're talking about
Why?
why is it different? I don't know. What's the difference between eating a steak and getting punched in the face? It's a big difference.
Okay, what's the difference between eating steak and launching a rocket? It's a big difference again.
Well, it
What is
is
the
because
disanalogy?
first of all, when someone launches a rocket at you, you're not voluntarily
No, not
consuming the
at you.
rocket.
Just launching a rocket. You're just a
No, if
rocket
I'm
company.
if I'm launching the rocket, I mean, why am I just launching a rocket? I don't understand.
Maybe you want to go mine asteroids or go to the moon or whatever. Right?
Well, then
There are all sorts
but then
there are
I'm
all
not
sorts of
using
different
but then I'm
things,
not using force. There's no force
right?
involved.
But why is using force? Why is that like the
Because
thing which makes a
because
difference?
I'm going
What's
to
the
tell you
disanalogy
because
here?
force is the only thing that can violate individual rights. That's why. And given
Okay,
that force can violate individual rights, and given that the only appropriate use of force is self-defense, you need to figure out what is the best, least risky way that where you can establish an agency or agencies that can use force in defense of individual rights. The problem, though, I mean, honestly, that in all of this is the main problem that I'm having is with the overarching body of law. Because if you have an overarching body of law that everybody's ascribing to, I don't know how that differs from government, other than you have different agencies in charge of enforcing it. But then I don't know how you don't run into the problem of these different agencies misinterpreting it.
so this is an objective law, to be clear. This isn't being made by these people. I mean, we can maybe go into that a little bit if you're um, wanting it. So I think this objective standard of law is already established in philosophy, um, and I think it's always applies whenever there's multiple people. Um, would you agree with that?
Can you repeat it just so I can make sure I'm getting it? What did you formulate that
Sure.
again for me?
So, like, let's say we have Crusoe and Friday on the desert island, and they haven't
Okay.
formed any states or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have rights?
Yes.
Okay. Well, then we have moved away from Ayn Rand because we no longer need a state to create the law, right? The law is already a thing
Well, hold on.
before the
No,
state
no,
was
no,
born.
no. There's a difference between law and rights. Depending on what you mean by law, ultimately. But there are rights because I still have the right to self-defense in that situation. But rights are the very thing upon which you base the laws that you make. So it's not the exact same thing.
In what sense are you basing the law on rights? Like, is it a logical implication situation,
No, because
or is
what
it
I'm
just
no
I
this
want this to be the law?
no, 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 no. What I'm saying is this. If we have rights, say I have the right to self-defense, the right to property, right? And now you come to me, let's say, right? And there's and you say, listen, it's easier if we agree that I protect your rights and you protect my rights, basically collective self-defense against anybody that encroaches upon us. So let's agree. So then we say, okay, that's an agreement, and then we make a rule. And if everybody else, people that come and live in our area, and we tell them, listen, this is how we operate. There's rules against doing these things. So those would be laws. Now, you may argue that laws aren't necessary. I'm just saying that laws and rights are not the same thing. Laws are there to protect rights, to codify rights. But I think the rights antecede laws.
So I would say the law in general, that just says what people's rights are, what people are allowed to do, right? So on the desert island, there are certain things that Crusoe is allowed to do with respect to Friday and vice versa. I don't think you need a government to say, "Oh, Crusoe is allowed to make these sorts of contracts and all this sort of stuff." It's all implied by the non-aggression principle.
Okay, well, I looked up law just now, and law is defined as a system of rules which a particular country or community recognizes as regulating the actions of its members and which it may enforce by the imposition of penalties. Definition two is a rule defining correct procedure or behavior in a sport. So that would not be it. Uh, so ultimately, I guess it's going to come down to then how we're defining laws. And if you're saying that there's going to be recognized rights that all these agencies are going to recognize, that to me it's basically law. But if it's not published, it's hard for me to see how each agency is going to recognize the same rights. Because
Well, don't worry, it's been published in my course, so people can just go there, I suppose.
Nice plug. I like that. That was good. That was good. But even if it is okay, but then you've got published law. Then we're going by Zulu's rules of procedure in society.
I'm not making
No,
this the
no,
law.
you're
I
saying that you've discovered them, or
yeah,
somebody else discovered them, and came across them and agreed with them. I get that, but the fact that they are discoverable doesn't mean everybody's going to discover them, and doesn't mean everybody is going to agree with them. And in my case, you only need a passionate minority or a slight majority who's going to agree to the overarching society. But in this case, where everybody can secede and everybody can go find their own agency, it seems to me you're going to end up with multiple agencies, even under the best of circumstances, that aren't going to recognize these laws. And if you don't have an enforcement system, you have an issue.
I don't see why if we're assuming best of circumstances, then
Yeah.
all these agencies would indeed recognize the
No,
objective
no.
equal. This
I'm talking about the
this
best of
disintermediate.
realistic circumstances, like something that I think can actually occur. I don't think it's possible that you're going to have every single, human being is going to agree to the same thing, or that most people are going to occur to the same thing. Now, if you're going to if the postulate here is that everybody in the community is in Galt's Gulch, where everybody agrees to the same rights and the same ethics, then I agree with you. Then there's no more to discuss, because I'd be fine with it. If everybody just agrees, that's cool. The problem is that to me crosses the bounds of being realistic. Even in my scenario where everybody agree, well, not everybody, but a majority agrees government is to protect rights. You don't, what did I just do? Are you still seeing me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's just on my screen. I don't know. Okay, as long as you're seeing me, I suppose it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So like I think there is a
Hold
division
on.
of labor.
I just want to be clear, is that just because I'm saying that these government will protect rights doesn't mean everybody agrees on the same philosophy. It just agrees. It means that a good amount of people agree on the type of government. In the scenario you're talking about, you're going to need even the people, like, you can't have large minorities disagreeing, because they're just going to go form their own agencies who aren't going to be governed by that. Okay, I got rid of it.
So yeah, it's always going to be the case that if you have a large group of people in some area, they could go off and do their own thing. Yeah. Um, and I think there is something perhaps missing here from this analysis.
Okay.
That there's a division between what the jurist is doing and what the judge is doing. The jurist is out there discovering objective principles of law, and the judge is there to apply those principles of law,
Okay.
right? It was already objective, and the jurist is figuring out what the law is, right? So these agencies, which might employ judges and whatnot, they are not coming up with the law, right? They are not, they are just applying it. So it doesn't make sense to say if we have this free market system, proper Anarcho-Capitalism or whatever, that they would be coming up with different laws. It seems like you're attacking David Friedman's position there, which I disagree with. I don't think David Friedman is correct. I think there's already an objective standard of law, just as there's already an objective standard of like basically everything else, anything else of value to it, that is, right? Um, so this law is, and again, like all philosophy is here to do on this issue is say what the law is, right? Um, and that's why I'm holding this as a philosophical system.
Hmm.
That if we have objectivism, then we have the non-aggression principle, which means do not initiate conflicts. Initiating conflicts is bad, and a conflict means mutually exclusive actions, right? So if we have Crusoe and Friday on the desert island, Crusoe pulls a stick out of nature and he fashions it into a spear, and he's going to the ocean to spearfish, and then Friday comes along and tries to pull that stick off him. We have mutually exclusive actions here. We have a conflict because Crusoe can't spearfish at the same time that Friday stokes his fire or whatever he wanted to do with the stick, right? That is the basis of law, in my view. And then you can build up everything you see in Austrian legal theory from just this core.
Austrian legal theory. You mean objectivist legal theory?
Well, I don't think the objectivists have a legal theory. It's very, if it is there, it's very, very primitive. It's Murray Rothbard primarily who came up with this legal theory, and then he was also other people have come in and they've come up with other stuff in this
See,
legal theory.
I'm sorry, I just wouldn't call it Austrian legal theory. I mean, it might be Rothbardian legal theory, but I wouldn't call it Austrian legal theory.
Well, it's
That's
the
just,
Austrians who came up with it.
well, it's some Austrians. I mean, I certainly don't think Mises and Hayek and Menger would have went along with it. Probably not Lockman and
Sure, because
Wieser
they didn't
either.
because
No,
they didn't extend
that's what, no.
praxeology into law. Like that is Murray Rothbard's innovation.
Well,
He
Hayek wrote the
applied
Constitution
praxeology
of
to law.
Liberty. I mean,
Yeah, I don't think Hayek is a particularly good jurist.
but he was Austrian though.
Right,
he's
but
he's more
this is
prominent than Rothbard. This is not not
he was an economist, right? He was an Austrian
yeah.
economist, certainly.
So was
But
Rothbard.
Murray Rothbard had the innovation, the genius to recognize, hey, this praxeology thing, we can apply it to law. We can
Well,
apply it to legal
he
analysis.
also took a lot from objectivism, by the
Yeah, and
by the way.
that's why they marry
Yeah.
together so well.
Well, but I don't know that they do. Now I had a question that I wanted to ask, and and I don't remember it. Oh, well, what do you do in cases like the amount of jurors that have to sit on a jury, or things that aren't objective, like the statute of limitations on crime and
Well,
in non-crime? That
well
stuff, I mean, that's
I,
not just something that's objectively definable.
I would immediately disagree that those things aren't objective. If it's
So
an actual area of law, then it is objective. You can figure it out, right? And I would say with a question like, well, how many jurors should we have deciding this? How it's the same question as asking how many steaks should the restaurant keep in their freezer, right? It's however many are needed, right?
well,
However many
but
food to have.
well, you can't know that, and you can't know, for instance, what's the proper punishment for an
Well, no, you
assault
can
second.
you can know that.
What's the proper punishment for assault second degree?
So
That's not
for
discoverable. That's not
the
objective in that
the gen
sense.
the general theory of punishment, which I go over in my course, by the way, is restitution plus retribution. This is Kinsella's idea of retribution. It is 2 eyes for an eye. So if somebody steals $5 from you, you can get that $5 back because you still own it, and you can also take $5 from them because you can retribute against them. So for an assault, it is whatever analogous assault that it's going to be. So if they did a big punch in your nose and broke your nose, then you're allowed to do the same to them. You're allowed to break their nose, right? That is what the theory of punishment has to say on the matter. We don't need some guy sitting in a room and he says, "Oh, I reckon 2 years in jail and
So,
$500 fine is good."
so
Like,
you're with,
how did you figure that out?
so you're with Rothbard that if I get into a fight with somebody and I break his ribs, then the court can punish me by having my ribs broken.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I would disagree on that. I don't think we have enough time to really get into that. I just kind of have one more question for you, and then you can ask me, a question or two before we wrap up. Um, Retaliatory force. The whole thing started with the idea of we were talking about whether we maintain our right to retaliatory force or we delegate it, right? In the case of these defense agencies, if you hire a defense agency, do you delegate your right to retaliatory force to them or do you still hold it?
I don't know what it means to delegate a right, really.
What I mean
Yeah,
by delegated
they're
is
allowed to defend you on your
no, no,
behalf.
no, not defend. What I'm saying is if you believe I've robbed your house, right? And you have a defense agency, do you maintain the right to come exact justice on me?
Yeah.
You do. Okay. Do you need to have a court of law find me guilty first? Or is
No.
you just believing it is enough?
No, not you believing it is enough. Whether it's true,
Well,
that's
yeah,
enough. Yeah.
but the point is that in a criminal trial, it has to be proven that the person's done it. You have, standards of
But
evidence. You have all
that's
types of factors.
that's a different layer to the question, right? It's not
But it's
what is
not though.
justified. It's, can you prove that you're justified in doing
No,
this?
what I'm asking you is, well, if you go and attack the wrong person, you're clearly not justified. That's
Yeah.
why it's okay. So you think, Johnny penmanship has robbed your house. You have the right to retaliatory force. You go attack this dude. It turns out it's not him.
No, not because you believe. Like, that's why I'm saying it's not because you believe it, right? This is just you're using a Cartesian doubt argument here. It's like, well, you might have made a mistake
You
on whether
might
he did
have,
rob your house,
but you might have.
and that's Cartesian doubt.
No, it's not. Cartesian doubt is doubting whether knowledge is even possible. I'm not claiming
No.
that.
That's a specific application of
No,
Cartesian doubt.
it's really not because you're not omniscient.
Hold on. The general method of Cartesian doubt is taking doubt as the primary. It's saying, well,
Yeah.
in that argument you gave there, you might have made a mistake, so therefore it's invalid, right? So if I say, hey, I'm justified in attacking this guy because he attacked me last week, and your rejoinder to that is, well, you might have made a mistake there. That isn't a rejoinder.
No,
It's
no,
meaningless. It's an
no, it
academic
actually
result
is
statement.
because you're talking about
This is
using
Cartesian
physical.
doubt.
It's
Come on,
not.
man.
It really isn't. It really isn't because
So I might
if
have made a mistake.
no, not just you might have made a mistake, but mistakes are made like that all the time. You're not omniscient. All I'm
This is
calling
so
into
clearly Cartesian
no,
doubt.
it's so you believe you're omniscient?
No, this
No,
is
of
so
course
clearly
you're not.
Cartesian doubt.
No, so
Oh my
no,
god.
it's not. It really isn't. So you're saying that if you can make a mistake, you're not talking about making a mistake in your general conclusions. You're talking about going and using violence against somebody.
Mhm.
So if you're going to use violence against somebody, you better be goddamn sure that you're correct. And all I'm saying is that if each individual in a given society gets to judge and gets to decide who has committed these crimes against them. Not everybody's rational. Not everybody's going to use a high standard of evidence. And even if they do, they could still make a mistake. And you're talking about going out and using force against people. And I
Yes,
just
I
want,
am.
okay.
And
And
it's the same thing across the board, right? When this guy decided to put this girder on the bridge here, well, he might have made a mistake and people's lives are at stake. So we can't be having this. He might have made a mistake, so therefore knowledge is impossible.
no,
Like,
no,
this is
no,
the
no,
road you're
no.
going down.
Totally different. It's totally different. I'm going to tell you why. Because
Not.
before no, because before you building a bridge, you're doing measurements. You're making sure that the materials are possible. You're doing an investigation basically to assure that this bridge is built correctly. You're talking about a situation. A guy breaks into your house. He has a mask on and he takes off. You haven't seen him. I come and tell you, hey, it was Johnny penmanship that did it. Now you're saying you were in your rights to go attack this dude.
No. Because that is poor evidence. That's just you saying, "Oh, it's Johnny penmanship." But if I have
Okay.
evidence,
So
if I
you're
have evidence,
saying,
like if I have him on camera and it's like, "Hey, that's Johnny
okay,
penmanship right
okay,
there,"
okay.
I
So
know that.
okay. So you're agreeing that you need to have an appropriate amount of evidence
Mhm.
before you go and use this force.
What I'm disagreeing on is that you don't have to. then present this evidence to a board of judges
No, we
and see
didn't
if
get
they
there
agree
yet.
with it.
We have not gotten there yet. I'm
Right, but
saying
it's
that.
just to be clear, I'm just clarifying. So
Okay.
that's where I'm
Okay.
disagreeing
But
in this case.
here is the problem with that, is that while you may rely on a high standard of evidence, a lot of people won't. And to have
Sure.
individuals on the fly deciding whom they can go use retaliatory force against is an extremely dangerous proposition. It's not going to lead to good results. It's certainly not going to lead to a rights protecting society. That's why you need to have objective rules of evidence that are promulgated so everybody knows and everybody's aware of what you're doing. In that situation, you're saying, no, no, I'm going to judge for myself. I'm going to know. Now, if all of it was you doing it for you, I would say I don't care. If you judge that shooting dope or what anything else is good for you, that's fine. But you're talking about using force against another human being in a situation where there's no way for him to know, for me to know, for anyone else to know if you're correct, because we haven't had a trial, we haven't had evidence presented, anything. You're just deciding. That's why we delegate the right of retaliatory force.
So you were saying there that we need to have objective rules of evidence that are promulgated. All right, so what you do is you study this thing called epistemology, and then you might publish a
Sure.
book called, I don't know, Introduction to Objective Epistemology.
Sure.
Just pulling a name out of my ass there. And that's how you'd have the objective rules of evidence that are promulgated. Boom, it's done.
Okay. And well, boom, it's done is fine. But we need to know that those rules are being employed when somebody's using force against somebody else. That's what rights protection is all about, is protecting
Yes,
people
and
from having
that's what
their
the
rights
firms could do.
violated.
Anybody could go about do this, and they're saying, "Hey, this guy's just crazy. He's just going around beating people because they look black or whatever, and he thinks that's sufficient evidence that they're criminal." Like, yeah, go and stop that guy. Go ahead, right? This is a question of what philosophy is prominent in
But
this
that's
era.
after the
If
that's
it's a subjectivist philosophy, then yeah, you're going to have a bunch of
But you're
crimes going
talking
on.
about after it's already been done. So now you go and do that to this dude. Now this dude says, "Fuck calling the police. I'm getting my boy to go
Sure, there are
exact revenge
rational
on these
people.
dude." Yeah,
There are
well,
always going to be irrational
there are
people.
always going to be
This is not a
irrational people,
rejoinder.
but it is, because even in a situation where people are primarily rational, that doesn't mean they've studied all the rules of evidence. That doesn't mean they know all these things. That doesn't mean that their judgment isn't skewed. That's why you don't have one juror. That's
Well,
why
then
you
they
don't
should
have
stop evading. They should stop evading. I don't know why it is. Hold on. I don't know why it is that you think that, oh, let's just get 12 guys, just 12 random guys who know nothing about the case, bring them on, and they'll probably be rational. It's fine. Like, we'll just have democracy vote on it. Like,
Well,
no,
well,
that's not how you figure
I'm not
things out.
necessarily saying that they should be 12 random guys, and they really aren't, because when you go through a jury trial, you do have voir dire where they go through a process where both the prosecutor and the defendant get to decide who sits on that jury. There is
Right.
a
Okay.
process, and not only
I,
that, but the criminal defendant can choose to circumvent the jury process and go right to the judge who has. But that's even assuming that the system we have now is the correct one. I'm not necessarily even saying that. I'm just saying that to allow each individual to decide for himself when retaliatory force is appropriate rises to a level of the danger of rights violations that I don't think is acceptable, and I don't think most people would think is acceptable either.
so let's say John Galt was being somebody punched him in the face and then ran off,
Yeah,
and then John Galt sees this guy next week and decides to enact retaliation against him. He
yeah,
decides to punch him.
yeah,
John Galt, clearly a very rational person,
yeah.
right? Would John Galt be committing an objective crime there?
I'm going to say that John Galt wouldn't do that. And I'm going to tell you why. Because John Galt would understand that eyewitness testimony is very, very,
No, John Galt's eyewitness testimony.
but it doesn't
He
matter.
saw it.
He still understands as a human being that he
Well,
may misidentify some. What if the guy has a twin
it's
brother?
Cartesian doubt.
No, it's not. You're talking about going to
He
punch it.
might have made a
Listen,
mistake, so therefore it's
well,
like John.
no,
Let's say John Galt is like a brilliant investigator. Instead of being an inventor, he's an investigator. Right? We have the John Galt of
okay.
investigation.
So do you think that the entire legal system should be designed as if everybody's John Galt? Even if that were the case, but I'm telling
I'm
you
not
that
saying designed.
that
Hold on. You said the legal system should be designed in such a way.
well, the legal
Again,
system, well, you
I'm
designed
not
the legal
I'm
system
not
in your
hold
course.
on. I'm not talking about designing what
Okay, the
bureaucratic
legal
structure should
system.
be
Okay,
set
so
up.
the legal system should be, you're saying the legal system should be based on everybody being a John Galt.
It's not even a should be. I'm not saying there isn't an
Well, then
alternative
what?
with respect to the legal system. They're just, this is the law.
But you are
John Galt,
arguing a should.
hold on. John Galt is indeed allowed to retaliate against people who have done crimes against him. He is allowed to do that.
Okay, let me say this. I'm not saying that it's because I may have been unclear in this. What I'm saying, I'm not saying people don't have a right to retaliatory force. What I'm saying that it's more efficient, it's better to prevent further rights violations if we give up that right to retaliatory force to a broader government, to somebody that has a monopoly on that retaliatory force, for the reasons that I've already stated, for the idea that not everybody understands proper evidence, to where if I go and retaliate, then they retaliate, you end up in a gang war, for the fact that there's different, you need to have objective law that's promulgated that people know. There's an abundance of reasons why I think that it should be delegated. I'm not saying that you don't have the right. I'm not saying John Galt would be unethical in doing that. What I'm saying is that for the governorship, for how a broader society is going to be governed, it's not a good idea to have it legal for John Galt to do that. And the reason is because I've known multiple sets of twin brothers that multiple people wouldn't be able to tell apart. It's not Cartesian doubt. It's the fact that you're talking about physical violence and the rules when you're going to use physical violence to everybody. What's the saying? The saying, I think it's from Carl Sagan, but I might be wrong, that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Well, extraordinary actions require extraordinary evidence. If you're going to use physical force against somebody, you better be damn sure that that's him.
Sure.
That's ultimately my point.
The
Now,
general claim is we assume John Galt has enough evidence, and I'm saying he is indeed allowed to retaliate. That is just an objective fact. He is indeed allowed to retaliate against this person, and if we have established that, we already no longer have Ayn Rand's minarchism.
hold on a second.
In
But
fact,
when you say allowed, what do you mean?
I'm saying per the objective legal code that I'm talking about here,
Okay, then no,
it is
he's
not
not
a
allowed.
crime.
Then no, he's not allowed. Yes, it is a crime by a legal code, because now you're talking about something that's
Why
codified.
is it a crime?
It's a crime because in order to, if you're going to have a society or a group of individuals, whatever you want to call it, living together, then you cannot have a situation where individuals are deciding for themselves when to go use force against other individuals. The risk is far too high. That's so when you say allow, I thought if you're just asking me in a simple, isolated instance, is a human being unethical for using retaliatory force? And no, in principle, no. But once you broaden this principle out and you apply it to an abundance of human beings living together, then the very risk principle that I introduced at the beginning, I know you disagreed with it, but I'm just telling you my thinking on this, is that the risk is so high of an abundance of rights violations taking place that yes, it's okay to preclude retaliatory force, especially when in the situation that we're talking about, it's not as if justice is going to go undone, because there's laws in order, there's a system in place to try, convict, and punish the person in that we're talking about. If there weren't such an organization, well, that's a different story altogether.
So, like, if we have it, then that on your view, it is objectively criminal for John Galt to retaliate in this situation, then we no longer can have the NEP, right? We can no longer have the non-aggression principle anymore, which means we have some sort of negation of the non-aggression principle, which my proof shows necessarily devolves into the primacy of consciousness, and we can go over the
How
proof right now if
how
you want.
wait a second. How does the NAP disintegrate in this scenario? And
Because
how
yeah,
does it go to primacy of consciousness?
so real quick, the reason why the NEP would no longer be holding here is because the NEP implies, through a long series of deductions, um, that you have estoppel, that you have the right to retaliate against people, that you have a right to enforce retribution. And the reason why any negation of the NEP necessarily Sorry, I'm just trying to sort my notes here. It's not working. Fuck. Oh, sorry, I was pressing the wrong button. So yeah,
It's
the
okay.
reason why any negation of the NEP, any alternative system, falls into primacy consciousness, I can go over now. So we have this problem of law, right, where we have scarcity, which means that two people can't use the same thing at the same time for different means, right? We can have conflicts. So law poses the question, okay, well, how should men deal with these conflicts? And there are three possible answers you can have to that question. Either you have the law of the jungle, I call it, which just anything goes, do whatever you want, who cares, right? Or there's mixed law, which is like some sort of medium. Sometimes you can do what you want, sometimes you can't. All sorts of different legal systems fall into this. Or you have the non-aggression principle, right? Mixed law is just anything which isn't the NEP or the law of the jungle. The reason why the law of the jungle falls into primacy consciousness, it fails on other grounds, and specifically why it falls into the primacy consciousness is because it's just whim worship, right? It's just, this is justified because I feel like it is. I feel like this is justified, so it is, which then relies on a whim epistemology, which then relies on the premise that your consciousness has primacy. It's I'm able to change reality because I feel like it, right? That one's easy enough. Mixed law, it's a little more difficult. It's if it's some sort of mixed law system, which is I can aggress in some sort of arbitrary situations that I just came up with, but not always. So it's not law of the jungle. Then obviously that's still whim worship. It's still primacy of consciousness. But there are also all sorts of different types of mixed law systems. I've got 8 of them listed here, but I'm not going to list them out because it's just too long. And they reduce into sort of two basic forms, which is the class-based, which is this guy is in the preferred class, he's the proletariat, he's Aryan, whatever it is, and therefore he's allowed to aggress against the other class, which is falsified on. There is no polylogism, but other than that, it's fine. Or the whim-based, which is the king said that this is fine, so it's fine. Obviously, the whim-based falls into primacy consciousness, but so does the class-based, because you're not having a universal norm for all these people. You're having some arbitrary distinction between class A and the complement of class A, right? It's you can't if you're operating upon rational principles, operating upon the premise that existence exists, then you're going to have a general rule for the entire set, for the entire concept. Man as such has these rules which apply. Any negation of that, you're evading reality. You're pretending that Aryans are different to non-Aryans, that the proletariat are different to the bourgeoisie, or whatever it might be, right? And then our only option left is the non-aggression principle. So the non-aggression principle is the only rational legal principle.
Okay. That hasn't told me why precluding every individual from being able to initiate force, I mean, to use retaliatory force, is primacy of consciousness. Secondly, the non-aggression principle is that's similar and very close to what Rand calls a non-initiation of force. But the estoppel theory has nothing to do with objectivism. That's Stefan Kinsella. And the objectivist epistemology is primarily inductive, not deductive. So you said you're going to deduce this from the NAP. In the case of the guy, if we have a government, let's say, they're not initiating force against John Galt, the hypothetical John Galt, or anybody else in this scenario. They're, in this case, using retaliatory force because he has gone and used force against somebody else. And that's barred because of the extremely high chance that if individuals get to decide for themselves whom to retaliate and in what fashion, you're going to have significant rights violations.
So that objectivist epistemology is primarily inductive, does not rule out
No,
deduction.
no, it
Both are
doesn't.
fine.
I'm
Like,
not saying it doesn't. I'm just saying I just want to be clear that it's
right, yeah.
primarily inductive.
There's an analogy to be drawn here with metaphysics. Like metaphysics, all you're doing is deducing corollaries of the existence axiom. That's all you're doing in metaphysics on objectivism. And the same thing is true of law. All you're doing is deducing corollaries of the non-aggression principle. That's it, right?
Hold on.
And
Hold on. Back up. I want to. Now we are going a little far afield from the discussion, but it's okay. But what did you say about deducing in metaphysics?
so in metaphysics, all you're doing is deducing corollaries of the existence axiom, the fact that existence exists. And Peikoff says something similar to this. I can bring it up, the exact quote. I believe I have it somewhere. Yeah, the essence of metaphysics, according to objectivism, is the step-by-step development of the corollaries of the existence axiom. And that's from Leonard Peikoff
Okay.
in Objectivism, Philosophy of Ayn Rand.
And you're taking that those are deductions from the existence axiom.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, let's even take the law of identity. That's just saying the same thing as the existence axiom, really, right?
Yes, but it's not deduced from existence.
And hold on, there's no step beyond this. And we take the law of causality. That is deduced from the law of identity.
No, it's
all
not.
actions, action event. Hold on, I can bring
It
up.
really isn't. He's not. I have the book in front of me. He is not going to say causation is deduced from identity.
It's
It's
he
all
said
learned. It's all learned by induction from experience. The axioms are
right.
discovered.
Primarily, it's learned from experience, right? You experience existence exists, and then you can go on to deduce the law of causality as a corollary. Like that's what it means to say it's a
No,
corollary
you're
of
not.
identity.
It's not. You're not deducing it. He's not going to say he's deducing it.
He may
If
not
he
say that,
does,
but he is.
oh, I disagree because a deduction means once you know one thing, then you deduce what's automatically implied by it. And
That's what it
you're,
means. It's corollary.
but no, because he's
It's
learning all these things, and
readily evident.
he says existence is identity.
Hmm.
You learn them at the same time, basically.
Yeah,
Is that you learn them both. You're not deducing one from the other.
I didn't
Just
say you deduced identity
you said
from.
everything that is in metaphysics is deduced from the axiom of existence. That's what you said.
I'm saying the essence of metaphysics, according to objectivism, is the system step by step. I can't remember the exact wording he used.
He says development. You said deductions, and I'm telling you
Okay,
it's not
well,
deductions.
development, deductions. What's the difference?
Well, deductions means that you're drawing particular conclusions from general truths, and that's not what he's doing.
Okay, so how is it not a deduction to
Hmm.
move from the law of identity
Hmm.
into, which is basically just saying the same thing as the existence axiom, right? What is it about that which is not a deduction to move from there into the law of causality?
Well, first of all, I was talking about existence to identity. That's the first thing. But secondly, it's not a deduction because you don't first learn identity and then deduce causality. You learn these things from experience, and you induce from experience to experience.
That
You learn that
that
there's
might be
causality. That's not
that might be
deduction.
the way that you learn it. You go, oh, there's all these things which are happening, and it all makes sense. There are laws, right?
But
That
that's
might
what
be the way that you
objectivism
hold
teaches.
on,
That's not
hold on,
just how
hold on,
you
hold
learn
on,
it.
hold on. But how do you validate causality? How do you validate the law of causality? It's not just by doing what Aristotle did, which is just looking out and saying, "Oh, look, there are these things which are happening, and they're immutable laws," which I reckon they're probably immutable, because that doesn't escape Hume, right? It does not escape Hume. The way you escape Hume is by deducing it as being a corollary of identity. That is Rand's innovation.
Okay, so chronologically, however, the three axioms are not learned by the developing child simultaneously. Existence, Miss Rand suggests, is implicit from the start. It is given in the first sensation. To grasp identity in later consciousness, however, even in implicit form, the child must attain across a period of months a certain perspective on his mental contents. He's not deducing. You're learning it from experience. That's not deduction.
I didn't. Okay, so it might be the
You
case.
may
Hold
argue
on, hold on,
differently. You may
hold
argue
on.
differently, but we're all talking
It,
about what
it,
objectivism teaches.
it's about the validation of these laws. I agree. You probably learn that murder is bad long before you can fully deduce it from the non-aggression principle. Probably, right? Unless there's a really autistic baby out there. What I'm saying is the validation of these principles is deductive, right? He is deducing from the law of identity and various
It's
other
not
principles that
deductive. It
all
really
actually
isn't. It's not. I mean, I don't know if you want to spend hours and we can't. I mean, I don't have the time to do it. Maybe I can have you back on and we can just debate epistemology and I'm fine with that. But it's not deduction. You're never in a situation where you're automatically deducing
I didn't say
causality from
automatically.
no, what I'm saying is I shouldn't have used the word automatically. I'm sorry. But where you're deducing causality from identity, it's inductive all the way. You've learned this by experience and you've grouped
Yeah,
various
you
concepts together and you've induced that this is something. You have
I
not deduced it. It's
I
not true.
agree. I agree that you've already probably heard of causality and learned that causality is a thing before reading Objectives in the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. I agree that's almost certainly always the case, right? That you've already looked out and you've seen that there are immutable laws. But how do you validate, how do you verify that that is indeed an immutable law, right? The one way to try and do that is the way Aristotle did, right? And that does not succeed against Hume. Or there's the other way, which is the way that Ayn Rand does it, which is you say, hey, it's a corollary of identity. And then it does succeed
You
against Hume.
sure you say that it has identity and things that in a thing does not act outside its identity. Got it. That's learned from experience and it's learned inductively, not deductively. Again,
It's
you know, I can have you back on to debate that's fine. I'm not trying to, you know, rush, but I had you, we were going to have a discussion about anarchy and we've kind of gone away a little bit and I'm okay. I'm okay with that. I just don't have the time tonight to really argue epistemology, but I'd be happy to have you back on. I've really enjoyed the discussion with you. They haven't exaggerate your prowess as a debater. You're very good, and I'm very glad you came on the show. Before I let you go, do you have any, or before we close, do you have anything in closing you want to ask me or to say in closing?
um I suppose if just to say in closing, so I think we've gone over most of the ground here. Um, just go on to liquidzulu.github.io and go to my course on libertarian ethics, and you can read it for free, or you can pay whatever price you want, whatever price you think it's worth, for the video version. And yeah, that has the entire basis of my legal philosophy, excluding the argument to me contrario I gave for the NEP there. I'll probably add it in at some point.
And you're
Um,
also you have a YouTube. I've
mm,
seen you're debating on YouTube. You're all over there as well, right?
yeah,
And you're on Twitter.
yeah.
You're debating on how can they find you on Twitter?
Oh, at Liquid Tulu. It was a two instead of the Z because I was banned off of Twitter. So I think I was being a little mean to someone, and the Twitter administration was not liking that.
Okay, well, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to having you back. I hope you'll come back because these are good discussions. I love a healthy debate. It's great. For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Liebowitz. Till next time.